I'd like to thank the City of Brisbane for providing us with this space, and UPC for providing us the opportunity to have this meeting here where we can accommodate many more people than we can in our usual room. And I'd like to introduce the regulators who are here. And they're going to be answering questions later. And maybe they could raise their hand or stand up, whichever they prefer. Nicole Yuen, Project Manager of DTSC. Vic Powell, Project Manager, RWQCB, the Water Board. Greg Shirley, Solid Waste Environmental Health Specialist. Greg, are you here? Perhaps he's still, oh, thank you. He must be on the way. San Mateo County Health Department. And Asha Sethi, who is the Public Participation Specialist at DTSC. And Asha wants to say something that is important that DTC wants you to know.
Sure. I just wanted to let everyone know that this meeting is being recorded, unlike our usual CAG meetings. So wanted to thank Caroline from the city for handling that for us.
Thank you, Asha. And since we don't have any name tags here for us, I'll have everyone introduce themselves, and or if she's going to be modest, I'm going to say that Madison Davis is the mayor of the city of Brisbane.
Hi, Madison Davis.
Sorry, Dana Dilworth.
Longtime activist in Brisbane.
Iris Gallagher, representing Daly City.
And member of the Bayshore Sanitary Board of Directors. And
Bill Detmer.
longtime member of the Lions Club.
Yes.
I'd like to now introduce Howard Pierce, PE, Director, Infrastructure and Environmental and Civil Engineering for the Universal Paragon Corporation, who has worked on this project for 13 years.
Well, this is great. Thanks, everybody, for turning out. That's way more than I thought we would have. So we have a presentation for you tonight. It's informative of what we've got. We've just been accomplishing in the last 6 months or so. And Tom Graff from GraphCon will be the presenter, the main presenter. We also have Christoph Jesianek from Geosyntec. He is the one that actually did the data gaps that Tom will be talking about. So, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Hello, I'm Tom Graff, and what I'll be doing tonight is to basically update those who have been following everything and give some initial information to those new to this about the Baylands, the work that's been going on in the Baylands, and the direction we're going.
Mr. Graff, can I ask, can you hear him in the back row? Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll be going through, we've already introduced the regulatory staff who are here tonight. I'll be going through a site background, through the Baylands, different properties, the operable units and the landfill, and then ending up with outreach, hoping we can get people to participate more. Let me see, am I doing? Get it? Nope, wrong way. Okay. I'd like to start out just by making sure everybody's looking at the right things. Is what we have here is up in the northern portion in. Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, much better. So in the San Francisco portion, we've got the Schlage OU and the northern portion of the former Southern Pacific Rail Yard. As we come south, we have what used to be called OU1 is now the UPC OU-SM, which is the DTSC oversight. OU2, again, still through the Southern Pacific Rail Yard. And then to the east, on the other side of the railroad tracks, is the Brisbane landfill. So just to give you kind of the background, the former Schlage Lock plant, which is the Schlage OU in San Francisco, I'll be going through it. If I go north to south, we go through the Southern Pacific Rail Yard, which again had a portion, the eastern portion of the San Francisco northern area. Southern Pacific placed fill over the site between 1896 and 1914. There were tracks throughout the area, and they performed locomotive maintenance from 1914 to 1960. So if I go east on the other side, the Brisbane landfill, it was operated between 1932 and 1967. There were solid waste disposed there, domestic, industrial, shipyard waste, sewage, and rubble. The waste was, no waste was disposed there after 1967. To give the oversight background, for the investigation, remediation, and closure for these sites, the Schlage OU, the San Francisco portion there, the UPC OU-SF, and OU1 in Brisbane is overseen by the DTSC. For OU2, the southern portion of the rail yard is the California Regional Water Quality Control Board. We call it the Water Board. They oversee OU2 in the landfill, and San Mateo County works with the Water Board on overseeing the landfill as a agency for Cal Recycle. To give you a brief San Francisco status, I know we're talking about Brisbane tonight, but I wanted to kind of bring you up to speed on where we are, San Francisco, as we move towards Brisbane. The contaminants of concern there were chlorinated solvents that were used by Schlage Lock that got into groundwater and migrated. Some of it migrated into Brisbane, and there were metals in soil. A remedial action plan was approved by DTSC in 2010. Soil cleanup was completed in 2011. Groundwater injections to biodegrade the chlorinated compounds in groundwater was completed in 2014. And so they're at the point now they're doing groundwater monitoring. And in moving forward with the approved RAP for the site, there'll be soil and hardscape caps and clean utility corridors for all the soil areas to prevent exposure to any metals in soil. And engineering controls for the buildings where vapors exceed criteria for residential or commercial use. There are deed restrictions in place for the sites, and as everybody I'm sure has seen up there, development is underway on the site. If I move south now into Brisbane, what used to be the OU1, now called UPC OU-SM, lead agency again, DTSC, and the contaminants of concern there are basically the same as the Schlage OU. We have chlorinated solvents in groundwater. Again, those have migrated onto the site through a groundwater pathway, and there are metals, primarily lead and arsenic in soil. The current status is the groundwater is part of the cleanup for the Schlage OU. So there were injections made. The materials are being monitored currently, and the concentrations are being monitored to make sure that remediation is ongoing and going as it is designed. A data gap investigation was done by Geosyntec in the fall of 2018, and that data gap investigation was basically designed through a work plan that was approved by DTSC. It was in coordination with DTSC as to focus on what really needed to be done. And when we talk about data gaps, what this study was really meant to do was to confirm what we knew from past investigations, the contaminants, the concentrations, and also provide a much denser sampling density, so we didn't miss areas that might have other chemicals of concern or that might be increased concentrations beyond what we knew. The work plan not only was approved by DTSC, but also consultants for the city of Brisbane. To give you a sense of the density, is these borings were done on a 100 by 100 foot grid throughout the entire site, which is a quite dense grid for a site like this. There were 149 soil borings. 333 samples were analyzed, both soil and groundwater. And what we found was that the contaminants of concern didn't change. They're the same ones. We didn't find anything different. The relative concentrations of the residual chemicals also were within the bounds of what we had seen before. So what it does give us is a good basis to move forward in designing a remedial action plan for the site. So, yes, you have a question?
Yes, I'm sorry. Could you be clear about, is that one 100 by 100 foot grid?
No, so if you see, I'll go back.
Sorry, I just want clarity.
So if you see all the green dots there, each one of those was a sampling location. I'm sorry, I should have actually said that. Is that each one is a sampling location, and they're all 100 feet apart. And so if you look at, that's 149 borings across the entire property. I mean, OU1, yes.
Okay. And so that is, the grid is like 100 feet times the number of green dots.
Yes.
100 feet by 100 feet, every 100 by 100,
Okay,
there's a
thank you
born.
for clarity.
Yes? The depths depended. So it went down to bay mud. It was, some were done for archaeology, for actually, Chris, why don't you tell them about the depths? I'm sorry.
So our goal was to collect samples of the fill, not from the underlying young bay mud. And the fill is thick between 22 and 20 feet in the area of OU1. So the samples were collected down all the way to 20 feet depth.
So again, as what he was saying, is that the site is underlain by bay mud. And so as that fill, we talked about when Southern Pacific had filled the site, it was dumped onto the top of the bay mud. And that's really what we're looking at for contamination. The bay mud has a very, very low permeability. Water really can't move through it. So it provides the under layer that we can work, where we know beyond that depth we're not going to get migration of chemicals. So a draft RAP was submitted to DTSC in April 2019, and both DTSC and the City of Brisbane have been providing review. It will go through review and revisions. Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you. So it'll be through review and revisions. What was proposed in it is that we'll do active soil cleanup where it's necessary. We'll do soil and hardscape caps, clean utility quarters to prevent exposure to the metals, to the residual metals in soil. Again, engineering controls in areas that are needed due to the chlorinated solvents and soil vapor. And then land use controls will be put in place. This draft RAP will be available for public comment review in the fall of this year of 2019. You have a question?
Who's paying for the something?
I'm sorry. Who's paying for the lead from Schlage? San Francisco or
The lead?
Brisbane?
There wasn't lead from Schlage. The Schlage cleanup is part of an overall cleanup that Universal Paragon has paid for.
You had one question on the second row. No? Sorry. My mistake. Oh, okay.
Well, I originally didn't, but since you called the second row, can you clarify what a hardscape cap is for,
Sure.
for
So-
the audience?
Yeah, I think that's actually good. I should have done that. Is hardscape is buildings, is concrete slabs, is pavement, anything that you can't get to the underlying soil through. So basically, it's structures, pavement, roads, and that's what a hardscape is. So the other, what is not hardscape, which we'll talk about a little later, are landscaped areas, open space areas. Those are the areas where we do different things to prevent access to contaminated material. What I wanted to go through is an example of what we found for the two primary metals, arsenic and lead, at the site. If you see here these dots, anywhere where you have a colored dot, not a white dot, was where we had an exceedance of the regulatory criteria for residential. And so what we're looking at for arsenic is up in this area. This is where the tracks were, if people knew where the tracks were back in the old days. And they had sprayed lead arsenate on the shallow soil to get rid of weeds, rats, everything. And so we have most of the arsenic contamination is in this area. Down here in the southern area, there's some occasional hits, probably related mostly to fill, actually, but not intensive area. Where we have lead with the arsenic up in this area, but the lead was much more common in the fill material back in the early days. So we have lead hits throughout OU1, which we'll deal with during the whole program. One thing that I want to mention as I go forward is development of the site is going to require between 3 and 20 or 25 feet of clean fill coming in for the development. And so when I'm talking about capping, soil capping, one of the things that will be accomplished because of development will be placing clean soil over the entire OU1, OU2 area. So if you keep that in mind as I talk about soil and depth. Oh, okay. Yeah, that'd be an example of remediation that we would do for this area, is where we have, for example, arsenic in this area or lead in that area. The depth of fill in this area is going to be probably about 3 feet alongside bayshore. So the normal depth of capping required by the Water Board or DTSC is 2 feet to 3 feet. 3 feet being conservative caps, 2 feet being a minimum. What the plan is for UPC is to have a minimum of 5 feet of clean soil over any impacted soil areas. So in this area, for example, where it'd be normally 3 feet, anywhere with metal concentrations exceeding residential would be excavated an extra depth of 2 feet, and then when the clean soil comes in, and that soil would be moved back into an area up in here where it has 10, 20 feet of fill over the top of it. So it'd be relocation, excavation, relocation of material. And so it's a more conservative, this takes away the chance of someone digging down, a kid in a park or landscaping, even down to 3 feet sometimes. This gives an extra factor of safety where no one is going to be able to get down to the heavy metal impacted material. Yes?
I remember when I did a public records search at DTSC where a person whose job it was to scour the trail, the rail cars. And he said that he knew that that the cars were carrying both lead and other heavy metals, and that they would create a pile, and that when that pile got too high, they would just then bulldoze it out. And so I'm not understanding because it, you know, when somebody says, I know there's a pile that we had lead ore in the carts, and that it was a big heap and then got spread out, I'm concerned that if you're only testing it here, that it's wider in that area than just that spot.
Well, if you look at what we're doing here, if I go back, we take your lead example. And so let's look at this. So every point here along on the 100-foot along here has lead in it. So our conclusion is any work we do in that area is with lead impacted soil. We're not saying that, so for example, if we have lead right there, that point there said that there's lead at the surface, at the middle, and at the bottom, if you look at the rings. If you look at the color over here, the orange gives you a shallow sample, which is 6 inches to a foot or a foot and a half. The green gives you a mid-level sample, and the blue gives you deep. And as Chris had mentioned, the borings have different depths, so the green and the blue are not at specific depths. But what we're indicating is in this position, in this area right there, we've got lead at the surface, in the middle, and at depth. So it's right, is if there was lead ore or anything moved around, we're expecting to find lead in large areas within OU1. And so that's why we've talked about, so the luckier thing for that, where we've got the deeper stuff, is that in this area, the fill's going to be upwards of 20 feet deep as it gets towards the railroad tracks. So any lead in soil, lead doesn't, we're only worried about it for people eating it or breathing the lead dust, because the lead is almost insoluble in water, in rainwater. It takes acid water to solubilize lead, and so we've got it underneath a very thick layer of fill, and nobody's going to be able to get to it. There won't be any dust. There won't be any physical contact with it. So you're exactly right. But if you look at the 100-foot centers, there's a lot of colored dots there. So we found lead. So I think that might support what that guy had said, is they may have pushed stuff off in that area.
Would you repeat the depth of the soil and the depth of the cap in those areas? What would they be? You mentioned them a minute ago.
The depth of soil, I might have to check with Crystal. It varies because the bay mud has varying depths underneath as you move through here. But the depth of the cap material is, again, in this area along Bayshore, we're looking at about 3 feet. And as you move towards this direction, the fill depths increase, and not the same everywhere, but it gets up to 20 feet or so in this area.
And then you said you're going to put 5 foot of cap on?
Yeah, I think we want to be really clear on this point. We're voluntarily, sorry. I can do this without there.
No, I'm just going to turn it down.
Okay, all right. We are voluntarily going to 5 feet. And the reason is we had this conversation, is the standard is my kids are playing or my grandkids are playing. I don't want them to be unsupervised, dig down there because nobody's watching 3 feet and come in contact with it. It's just not a risk I'm willing to take, or any of us at UPC are. So it's compacted fill, and to get down 5 feet in compacted fill, you need to be an adult with a big shovel, working real hard to get down there. And then we have operation manuals for anybody who's supposed to be working there, construction workers, et cetera. There will be no casual contact, and that's why we're burying it so deep.
And in the operation manual, are there ways in which you can check every time something that is not what you hope it will be occurs? In other words, if there's usually people who do construction, they want to finish. They want to do it. They do want to do it correctly, but they want to do it. And that sometimes results in not having the standards met. So I just wondered how you were going to protect against that happening.
I think that's just good supervision on our part. And we have, at the end of the day, if there's a problem, it's our problem. And so we're going to make sure, and we want everyone else to be watching and making sure and keeping our feet to the fire on this, that we do our job. But that's really what it is. Somebody has to be checking. We have to inspect what we expect to happen, and that's what we're going to do. And on the OEMs, when someone goes out there, they have an OSHA standard that they have to maintain that says here's what they have to do. So for a competent licensed contractor, they're going to follow their criteria of what they're going to do because they're not going to want the OSHA claim.
So will you allow inspection logs of those issues to be available for the public?
Sure.
Well, actually, they are. If you look at what's been going on for the Schlage OU, is DTSC oversees all the health and safety, and whenever there were problems, anything found, DTSC has overseen when they come across something that, because, on a site like this, every once in a while you're going to dig someplace and get something that you didn't count on. And so they report it. They have to report to DTSC in the sense, or it'll be to the water board in OU2. And DTSC makes sure that everything is handled properly. So there is a public record for that.
Well, I'm just asking if you would be willing to do a direct one that allows people to see for themselves that.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Transparency is a good thing for everyone.
Tom, I have a question back here.
Can I follow up real quick? So I think it's also important to consider what housing is likely to go there. So it's not like it's going to be a development, in my understanding, of a bunch of single-family homes where all of a sudden someone wants to go outside and build themselves a swimming pool. So it's likely it's going to be landscaped. There's going to be an HOA. The HOA is going to know what can and cannot be done. We're talking about condos. We're talking about multi-family housing. And so in those scenarios, there's just not a whole lot of interaction with the dirt normally, or going outside and deciding you want to excavate something because you want to put in some new landscaping. I mean, I think what's going there, the types of housing is going to prevent a lot of the scenarios that we might see otherwise.
Right. This is not single-family housing with your own big backyard where no one's seeing what you're doing and no supervision. This is a series of multifamily housing. The lowest density we're going to have is in the mid-25s to the acre, up to 100 units to the acre, and all of the space will be open and public open space. So it would be somebody going into one of the parks or one of the green belts and starting to dig away, and hopefully somebody's going to notice and say, hey, why are you doing that? Can I see your permit? What are you doing?
Right.
So the odds of it being somebody in their own backyard, nobody noticed, and they decided to dig a well, that has very less likelihood. It could happen,
Right.
And hopefully we'll find it and correct it right away, but
And the businesses will obviously, who are renting there, will
Correct.
be informed of what they can and cannot do. Obviously, the city will know.
Correct.
So if any work needs to get done in a park or along a trail or in any type of open space, the people who would be working on that are going to be completely informed about how deep we can go and, to make sure that none of those things are encountered. So I
Yeah,
think
and-
the type of housing protects people even more than, a development that was single-family homes.
And what we want to be clear about is anyone who is a professional digging a hole on lead and arsenic, you are not going to get sick from casual contact. You'd have to start eating it. And so what we are concerned ourselves with are little kids, because they have smaller bodies, it takes less to ingest, and we're trying to make sure that there's no chance that they can come in contact with it. An adult, I think most adults will go, I'm not going to just start eating
dirt.
But having it blow on you and having it go like that is not an issue.
Which, of course, though, we're gonna try to make sure that it's not blowing on anybody.
Yeah.
So
No. But listen,
worst of the worst case scenario,
there's
which is very
realities,
unlikely.
Madison, there are realities of how we do this. So when we're moving the dirt, some of it will become airborne. We will have airborne monitors all over. If they go off, we stop. We have to water. There's a very particular DTSC procedure when we're doing the construction. All of the things we're talking about now is once we're post-construction and people are then moving into the site, and there's no more construction going on, and now it's somebody is going to go dig through the 5 feet that are already there for what reason I don't know, right? Because they'd either have to pull a permit from the city, or they may just be rogue and out there digging a hole, in which case somebody will see it and somebody will say something and we'll stop them because it'll take a while.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
We have a question back here really quickly, right?
Yeah, I'm new to this conversation, but I'm just concerned about, like, this is talking about covering up stuff that could be very toxic and poisonous for people, but I'm down in the marina and they've been pile driving and pile driving and pile driving, and my car is covered with dirt and dust, and that's just the stuff I can visibly see. So how do we know that when you guys are pile driving and not just covering up all this toxic stuff, what are we going to be exposed to, and how can you guarantee that we are being protected from breathing this day in and day out, because we're the ones living here and we're the ones having to breathe it in and deal with it, covering our homes and covering our cars?
This is something that is standard practice now on construction site. It wasn't 30 years ago. What happens on these kinds of sites, there's dust monitoring that's done both for total dust, but also chemical specific monitoring. So for example, when you're working in areas with soil with lead and arsenic in it, is that in addition to just perimeter monitors that tell you how much is moving around the site, there's also specific monitors that are collecting the dust, and then they go to the lab for analysis. So what we look at is what is leaving the site, and what are the concentrations in the dust leaving the site. So those are all specific. That data we can talk about the public website that shows the dust analysis. You know, it's something that is a standard practice now for sites. And so what happens if you're in an area, so for example in the marina where you're getting dust on your car or something, where the agencies, as long as that dust doesn't have a lot of chemicals in it, what they're doing is they're just monitoring how many particles per square meter or per cubic meter are leaving the site, and they have an allowable amount, and that may be some of the dust that gets on the car. It's different when you have chemically impacted soil. Then it's not only the total dust leaving the site, it's specifically what is in that dust. Is it toxic? And so if you're getting dust at the perimeter that could potentially be toxic, right away it's shut down. What are you doing? Are you doing more watering? Are you doing some kind of a treatment so you don't get the dust moving, covering stockpiles? And so there's a very specific protocol that is done for that. Yes?
Let me give you this. Hang on. This, for the last year, which is current situation at the Brisbane Marina, they've been pile driving. They had one dust monitor at the far corner of the property, not in the wind flow of all the dust. I have a video from last year's Kite Festival where the dust was blowing so hard off of that site, sweeping across the parking lot, and all the kids that were trying to fly kites, which they couldn't because it got too windy. And I took a video that had the city clerk in it and had Brisbane PD in it, and I sent it to Bay Area Air Quality Control Management. And they first response was, "We didn't see it ourselves, so we can't do anything." And I said, "Excuse me, it's on video. There's the police. There's the city clerk." And I finally got a response from them about 3 weeks ago that said virtually nothing. And so this is the current state, so we're not very trusting of these.
But this is a perfect example of what I was explaining. Out at Sierra Point, the surface soil is not contaminated. It is not. The surface soil is not contaminated. I have seen the samples. I would be happy to show you samples taken of that surface soil. That's the cover on top of the landfill. The cover soil is clean. There isn't any problem with the cover soil. So unless you have some other chemical information that nobody else has, then the air board is worried about the total dust leaving, and they have their protocol for it. So it'll be very different on this site because we know there's lead and arsenic in the surface soil. So you can't get something where you have big dust blowing off site because that will be chemically analyzed, where the stuff at Sierra Point is not being chemically analyzed because it's not toxic dirt.
So I think a couple more questions, and then you want to get on
Yeah,
with
I
the
should
presentation.
probably
I
get
don't.
I have a question.
Fellow has his hand. You know what, though, we've already heard from you, so let me.
For Schlage Lock, I think they had less heavy metals because the way they handled Schlage Lock, or at least my recollection of what was done, or what we were told was going to be done, was that the heavy metals were all moved and placed in one accumulated area, and then had hardscape or will have an asphalt cap on top of it. And so what it seems like you're saying to us is that none of this soil is going to move, it's just going to be covered up.
No. That, what I just said, what I just said in the beginning of the site, and I go back actually to this slide. For example, here with arsenic, we know we've got arsenic in excess of residential criteria. That's an area where we have 3 feet of soil that's going to be imported to the site, right? So what UPC has said is, instead of a 3-foot minimum cap, or 2 foot or 3 foot that DTSC would require here, we're going to have 5 feet in any landscaped areas, any areas that are not underneath buildings, underneath pavement. So what'll happen is, let's say there's an area here that's going to be a landscape, that's going to be open area where someone could get to it. It'll be excavated to a minimum depth of 2 feet, relocated somewhere else, and then it will have 5 feet of clean fill over that area because you've taken 2 feet out and you're bringing in the 3 feet of soil which is necessary for the development. So what happens is, soil will be relocated when necessary, when it's, we're going to need clean utility corridors. So depending upon the depth of utilities, it'll have to be excavated in those areas, relocated, so you'll have clean soil in the utility corridors. So it's something that is there will be relocation, and there will be some areas where the soil fill will just come over the top of it. Okay.
My question is, I just want to cap what you said is, so can we assume anywhere, the minimum, anywhere will be 5 feet of soil?
No. What I'm saying is, anywhere where you have exposed soil, open space, landscaping, if there's a building that's...
No, if there any place that doesn't have hardscape.
Yes.
Will have at least 5 feet of soil.
That's correct.
And then I understand you're going to take out 2 feet so you can make it 5 feet. And then, then it's going to, I'd say, undulate from 5 feet to 20 feet, depending where you are, unless there's hardscape.
Correct.
Right? And I'm assuming if you do pile driving, because someone brought it up, that would be after you've already put in that 5 feet to 20 feet. You're not going to pile drive on something that could, then you're going to fill it first, then you'd pile drive?
You have to, because you have to get your...
I know that, but I want to make sure everybody hears that.
Yes, okay, good.
That's why I ask it.
Good. That's a good point.
Yes, so where they pile drive, they're going to first put in the 20 feet, the 5 feet, whatever it is, of clean fill, then they pile drive. So the stuff that's coming up when you're pile driving is surface. It's not going to come up from 5 feet down and jump around. It's going to be coming up for what's on the surface.
That's correct.
So we have 2 more questions, 2 questions here, 1 here, and then I think maybe, can we get a show of hands who, if we get those 3 questions, do you want to go on with the presentation? Can you give me your hands, because I don't want to run. Okay, so I'm going to just take 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to go on with the presentation. So thank you for your patience.
Hi, thank you. So I think it's clear that once we've got the hardscape, once we've got that topsoil, it's fairly safe. It's the moving of the soil is my question. with the wind that comes up here that knocks down fences, that moves the dirt so quickly, I don't expect an answer right now, but I think the community will want to have an answer about how does that work when the wind is just blowing dirt wildly? And then it gets monitored and sent to a lab, and the day later, you get a result, or on the weekday.
Is this on?
That's the concern.
I agree with you. And so what we're going to do is we will come up with a plan, and we'll have a separate workshop to talk about the air monitoring and how we do it during construction. We weren't prepared to talk about that today. We're prepared to talk about what happens once it's finished. There are lots of controls that we will put in place. And the fact that they only have one air monitoring for a site of that size, I don't think is adequate. Clearly not. Okay, so I don't know how they got away with that, but that's not us. We will have them, we will monitor the dirt. It is, listen, there's a certain amount of this in major earth moving, which is what we're going to be doing. We can do our best. We can keep it watered down. We can use gorilla snot. It's a horrible term, but it's what it is actually called. And it's stuff that you spray down, which binds the dirt until you're ready to move it. And so it isn't just blowing everywhere. So we will take erosion measures. There's a lot of stuff that we will do to try and keep it down. But I don't want to mislead anybody. It's gonna be, dirt will be blowing, and it is just what's going to happen as we go through it. The good news is the prevailing winds are going towards the bay, and if it's capturing the land, we own 700 acres. It's not like there's a 12-acre site, which is in the marina, and it's blowing right off there. It's blowing from the west to the east, and that's all the landfill. And it's then the freeway, and there's nobody who's living over there. So some of that will be contained because we'll do construction fencing along Bayshore, and the wind is coming down and across and not coming the other direction. So I think some of that will be taken care of just by the general nature of the winds, and some of that is just up to us to manage.
But there's a commitment then to have a community workshop to discuss
Absolutely.
the air plan and how you would monitor and get community input in that. And of course, DTSC and the Air Board would be there. So,
hi, there's been a lot of talk about clean soil, and I'd like to know where that clean soil is coming from and what's going to happen with the big mounds that have been being collected, which if that is the clean soil, as I understand it, that's been delivered self-reported. So I want to know, how do we determine what is clean soil? And then finally, since you brought up the gorilla snot, adding more chemicals probably. I mean, I don't know what's in that, but but I just want to point out that we have to think about a lot of times the ways that we try to remediate just create unintended consequences.
Okay, thank you.
And then one other quick question too is, you mentioned that the bay mud was not permeable, and I was just sort of confused by that. If it's called mud, isn't there a lot of water in it?
Yes, so let me go through your questions if I get them all right. Is that the soil that gets imported to the site, DTSC has a whole guidance document on sampling soil as it comes to the site. And so any soil that gets brought to OU1, OU2 will be screened by the regulatory agency, DTSC Water Board. It has to be chemically tested, and the agencies have to approve the import of that soil. So that's something that the agencies have a guidance for it. You have to be able to identify where it's coming from. Was it a contaminated site? Was it a clean greenfield site? They have a number of samples per cubic yard you have to do. So there's a whole sampling protocol before you can ever import soil to these sites. So that's a question for that one. Oh yeah, and so again, where the big fill is on the eastern side in the landfill, any soil that comes is going to have to be tested again and approved by DTSC or the Water Board before it's ever brought to OU1, OU2. There's a whole screening process. Just like it would be coming from somewhere else, it has to go through the screening process. And then the last one was the gorillas.
It was just unintended consequences of using a surfactant.
Yeah, actually, Gorilla Snot has been approved by regulatory agencies for use because it's a non-toxic, it's like, I don't want to call it glue, it's something that basically holds the soil in. But I've dealt with that on a number of sites, and there's a whole spec sheet for it, and it's been an approved regulatory from a chemical basis. We're not introducing toxic chemicals to the soil.
Okay, we have one last question, and then we're going to move forward.
Oh,
Bay
I'm
mud.
sorry, okay.
Sorry, the bay mud.
Bay mud, yes, there's water in bay mud, but the particles are very, very fine clay particles. And so for water to get through any kind of soil, it has to have an avenue. So if you start at gravel, water drops right out of it. If you have sand in your hand, the water drops out. If you get down to silt, it starts coming slower. If you take a piece of regular clay or bay mud and you squeeze it, the water won't come out of it. It's caught up in the pore spaces. So what you have is you've got a whole blanket of soft material, yes, that has water in it, but water can't flow through it because it doesn't have the pore. It goes through it very, very, very slow lines. Also, the other benefit is underneath the bay mud, the water from the hill is trying to come up through it, so the water is actually coming the other direction. It has an upward vertical gradient, so the monitoring wells in a number of areas of the site, in the deeper zones below the bay mud, the water comes up over the top of the land surface because there's a pressure underneath. The water is trying to push up through the bay mud. It can't get there because the bay mud seals it.
Okay, last question.
I got two answers, questions, I mean, sorry. How about the soil from San Francisco, and they brought it to Bayland? And the other question I was going to ask you, what happened if we have an earthquake?
So I didn't understand the first question.
What was the first question? It's okay. Okay, why don't you tell me? I'll do it.
That's on my throat.
Okay.
He wants to know about the dirt that came from San Francisco.
Yeah, what happened with the soil from San Francisco to Brisbane?
So soil's been coming from San Francisco to the landfill for a long time. So I don't understand.
Well, from the shipyards, the soil down there where they put the houses and everything, all that dirt's bad. So they brought that dirt over here to Brisbane.
So
I think it's about the quality of soil coming from San Francisco.
I understand your question.
Okay.
So part of what happened in the shipyard is when there was radioactive soil that was taken and then deposited and then not found. Is that the question? So on the western side, when you look at when the soil was added, it was pre-radioactive substance. It was added, in the early 1900s. And then no other soil came into the west side. On the east side, where it's the landfill, there may be some there, and we're going to have a protocol to find it before it gets moved. So does that answer your question?
And you know what, and we actually have a slide about that, so if you can hold off on that, I think that's one of them.
Yeah, earthquake and liquefaction is,
coming up.
Will come up, so if you can hold that question, we'll get to that.
One more clarification.
Yes.
And that's about the discussion of the depth. It sounded like to Mr. Carter that you were saying that there would be 20 feet of soil that would be imported, and I don't think that's what you meant.
Oh, it is actually.
Oh, it
yes.
is what you
It
meant.
is.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's there's again. Well, maybe you could describe.
Yeah, if you look at the site, we have to build up, in order to make it level, we're building up one side where it comes down, and the other side not as much. So bayshore, we're coming in kind of at about 3 feet above bayshore, but if you take that as a datum line straight across, you're 18 to 20 feet above the tracks. And so in order to have a flat pad, it's a triangle. And so on one side of the site, and it happens to be where the worst contaminants are, we have the most clean soil that goes in, and it's compacted. And on the other side of the site, which is why when we looked at those hits that are along bayshore, we just said we have to excavate those out. And so that's where we're going to take them out, and we're going to move them either under the road beds where they can't be reached, or we're going to put them under where we have a lot more dirt, but we've committed to a minimum of 5 feet of clean fill so no one can get access to them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
All right. I'll go to OU2. The lead agency for OU2 is the Water Board. The contaminants of concern are a little different here. We do have the arsenic and lead in soil. We've got petroleum in soil and groundwater. The primary source of the petroleum is the bunker fuel that was stored on site for the trains many years ago. And then we've got some localized areas of chlorinated solvents, one particular area of high concentration. A data gap investigation was just completed in the spring this year, 2019, and this data is being used to put together a RAP for the site. Again, we had very similar results from the OU1, the OU-SM investigation. The work plan for the work was coordinated with the Water Board, approved by the Water Board. It was 100 by 100 foot grid, same as OU1. 559 borings, it's a much larger area than the OU1. 1,388 samples were analyzed, both soil and groundwater. And the results of this investigation actually same thing. We didn't find any new areas of concern. We didn't find any new chemicals of concern. The concentrations we found were similar to the ones that have been resulting from the investigations over the past 30 years. So from that standpoint, again, the data gap investigation was successful because we have confirmed what was done before. We have a much higher density sampling, so we were able to understand that we didn't have additional areas of contamination, either of the same chemicals that we didn't know about, or new chemicals that we would have to deal with. So a draft RAP is currently being finished. It'll be submitted this month in July to the Water Board and the city for review. And the RAP proposes much the same as OU1, but a little more, because there's going to be active soil and groundwater cleanup where necessary, but it is definitely necessary in some areas in the site. We'd have the chlorinated area will have to happen when we're doing corridors through the Bunker C area. That'll have to be treated. So we've got soil, as we talked about again, soil and hardscape caps, clean utility corridors to prevent exposures to residual metals, and also exposure to the Bunker C, which is in the middle of the site. We'll have engineering controls incorporated for building design where there's a potential for exposure to the chlorinated vapors. Land use controls, deed restriction will be in place. And again, the draft RAP, we're anticipating it'll be released for public review here in the fall of 2019. What I want to do is do a similar thing that I just showed for the OU1. In here, you can see where it's white, that means there was nothing found above residential. So here we've got, again, the arsenic along where the tracks were. And as we come down in this area of the site, we still have arsenic, but much less dense in this area. One thing I want to point out is people ask about Industrial Way. Industrial Way was included in this data gap analysis. And if you see the dots, it's on that 100-foot spacing all through the Industrial Way area also. So the Water Board has included the Industrial Way area with the OU2 area, so it's being handled as one complete unit. Lead is the very same thing. We've got lead throughout the OU2 area, again, primarily because of the fill. And there was some surface work that was done, but a lot of the lead is just due to the fill that was placed, before 1920.
So lead, we're looking for red, or are we looking for the green?
So, as we said before, the orange is the shallow.
Okay.
The green is the midpoint, and the blue is the deepest. So again, because the boring depth varies because of the depth of bay mud, where you're looking at the orange, so for example here, We've got lead basically there because of the lead arsenate. You see how it's all shallow soil up there? Whereas back down here, we've got the shallow and the midpoint. Some deeper here, here. But you can see is when it has multiple colors, that means it's been found at shallow, midpoint, and deeper points. For the petroleum and soil, this is the area that we know the bunker fuel has impacted. This is the line of the old work that was done before this data gap analysis. We included that because those samples were taken. And this is the high concentration area here of the bunker C here and there. And again, our work confirmed it in these areas, but also this work was done and this was a new point next to it. So we know where the high concentration areas are and we know where the area of impact. These other samples up here those are deeper. We've got some shallow, some midpoint, and that'll be because oil from the trains, it could have come in the fill, or diesel that was someplace. So it's petroleum is in the areas. The impact of petroleum is much different. Again, we've got primarily heavy motor oil type, so we don't have a lot of vapor concerns with it. So again, it's going to be much more like a direct contact. For the groundwater, the shallow groundwater here is in a bowl, and the water board has indicated that it's not a drinking water source. And so what we're looking at is primarily in groundwater, what is going to create a vapor because the groundwater is not moving. And so then the next slide here, we look at chlorinated solvents, which create the vapors. So in soil, it's really limited to one area right here where it's been found. And around the rest of the site, as you see, we've got all white. We're not seeing soil concentrations of chlorinated solvents. For groundwater, it's a little different. The highest concentration area, again, is right in here for groundwater, but we have some hits in these areas of chlorinated solvents. And again, the primary concern here is that the groundwater could create vapors that could then be vapor intrusion risk for buildings. So as the site goes forward, I should probably indicate is we have a remedial action plan, which is the grand scheme of things. This is how we approach the site. Then as you build out separate buildings, separate areas, they have what they call remedial design and implementation plans. And that's when you start looking, you say, okay, if we're going to put a building right here or a building right in here, we're going to have to go take vapor samples to find out, do we have a problem or not? Do we have to solve a problem? Do we have to clean up the soil? What do we have to do? Whereas if this area, let's say that area is going to be a park, the concentrations in groundwater are very low, so we're not really worried about an open park. So it's going to, as we move forward with development, as you start taking specific action, there will be follow-up sampling that's necessary to decide, is there a vapor problem? Is there, how far does the lead go? What are we doing? So that's what happens as we move forward. Sure.
In the report from the Southern Pacific Rail Yard, there was a lot of chemicals that were listed, like besides arsenic and lead, like barium, chromium, copper, zinc, benzene, TCA, TCE, dichloroethylene, and vinyl chloride. I don't see any of those on your report.
No.
And also, I'd like you to point out exactly where Stauffer Chemical was on the map, so that that was also a huge source of contamination for the area. So I understand that you've tested for the lead and the arsenic and the oil, but I'm not seeing these other chemicals and components on
Sure.
your investigation.
And what we're talking about is that Yes, there were metals found, copper, barium, chromium. What I'm illustrating here, what the primary metals are. And so if you look at barium, if you look at chromium, you look at copper, it's handled exactly the same way as the lead and arsenic because it's only contact that we're looking at. So, and the other ones, you said the tetrachloroethylene, vinyl chloride, those are the chlorinated solvents, which I lumped all into one category. So when I look at the slide back here, and I said, here's chlorinated solvents in groundwater, some of these are, this one I think is tetrachloroethylene, this I think is vinyl chloride. So what I did is lump all those together because they behave much the same way. You remediate them the same way. They have vapor concerns much the same way. So yes, we're not ignoring these additional chemicals, but we're putting them into groups. So the metals that behave the same, I use arsenic and lead as a proxy. Good word for that, because they're the most prevalent across both OU1 and OU2. And the Stauffer area down in this area down here, I believe it was right here, actually, is my recollection. It was back in that area where these buildings are now. And there were samples taken through the area, and I've seen the results of those earlier results, and there's definitely metals found. But again, it's no different than the arsenic or the lead that we found. It has to be dealt with. And those results we work with in the remedial action plans with Water Board for this site. So it's taken into consideration exactly the same way. There's nothing being ignored.
I'm glad you asked the question because there is some confusion. We typically look at it as saying that there's heavy metals, which there's a list of heavy metals, and those are dangerous if you come in contact with them. Lead and arsenic are the two highest concentrations of those, so if we deal with those, we cover all the rest. And then on chlorinated solvents, I think there's 5 different solvents in the chlorinated that are all lumped together as chlorinated solvents. So I'm sorry if we weren't clear about that, but there's nothing you mentioned on the list that is not covered in those 2 buckets. And did you find all of those chemicals there? Chris, do you want to address that?
It's difficult to say right now.
Chris, hang on.
Thank you. The simple answer is yes. We found those chemicals at different locations, however, at very low concentrations. That's why we don't show them here during the presentation. When you will be reviewing the RAP, there will be appendices with laboratory test results. There will be maps showing very detailed concentrations at every location.
I had a question about SVOCs, which were at one time at least thought to be by the oily water separator. And are they, the SVOCs, what's happened to them?
Those exist at the site, just like, and I kind of lump them in with the petroleum at this point because, and so Bunker C has the SVOCs in it. The motor oil has the SVOCs. And so those are all handled, though. They're all discussed, and there's actually separate analyses for the SVOCs that are listed in the RAP.
And I was looking at a presentation that Vic Powell gave last October, and it showed the land use that was planned at that time. Do you have an updated map now that you have all this additional information with the data gap studies? I'm interested in where the residential uses are planned, overlaying that with the, overlaying that with what you've told us today.
Okay, so Claire, thank you for asking that question. We're in the process of putting together the overlay map now. When we agreed to the standards under JJ, we know that residential has to be ground level residential that can take daycare and hospital uses, and that means it can't have any VOC contamination possible. So we get that. And so we're going to move the residential around on the site where we have soil that doesn't have to be capped like we are doing in Schlage, okay? So we get that. And so do I have a plan for you today to show you? No, we're not at that point yet because we just had our first intake with the community. We're laying that out. We'll come back in August. We'll have some better ideas in August. And this work has now been completed by then, and we'll have an overlay where we'll show you. But if you look at, if you go back to that slide for a sec, that on, yeah, any of these. Okay, so Main Street is about where number 19 is. If you can, is that number 19? Am I reading that correct? Yeah, that's about where Main Street comes in. And so all the residential is north of that point. And so if you look at that, there's just one hit that is an issue north of that point, and the rest of those hits are all south. And so very wise decision at that point of where that is. But we have 7 million feet of commercial that can live over the top of that stuff. We have parks and open space that can live over the top of that stuff. We won't put residential over that. And that was the city, in coming up with the language for JJ, was very specific on how that language was written so that it can't happen. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
Who has a question? Right there.
You made a mention to land that doesn't need to be capped. Are you still intending to cap 5 to 20 feet over everything, whether it needs to be or not?
What I said was there will be 3 to 20 feet of soil that comes in, right? And what I said is over any land that is open, landscape, open space, anything that is accessible by either gardeners or children in a park or people, that will have a minimum 5 feet of clean soil cap over the top of it.
Yeah, no, you didn't answer my question. I did hear that part earlier, but just a minute ago, either you or the gentleman next to you were making reference to the fact that you were putting the housing over areas that quote unquote did not need to be capped. And I just wanted to meant that you didn't mean what you said.
No. Okay. I was talking about VOCs. So if you look at what's in the Schlage OU in the San Francisco section, we are putting housing that has a garage level below it, and that is okay over a plume that has a VOC that comes up because it gets caught by the garage. You then have a vapor monitoring system that if it then has vapors, fans kick on and it blows out. Part of what Brisbane made sure of is we could not do that on the Brisbane land. So we understood that. That is the rules, and we intend to follow those rules. So does that answer your question? It wasn't referring to the cap. It's referring to where if you have VOCs, which is different than the heavy metals.
So you're not putting a VOC cap in the area where the level of VOCs detected is below the significance for remediation. Is that what you're saying?
Can you restate? I'm not so.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to follow that too.
So you say you are putting a fill of 5 to 20 feet because of the lead, but you're not going to put an impermeable barrier for the VOCs because you're looking for areas where this area of the significance is below the threshold. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So look, so let's be clear about what VOCs are. They're organic compounds that are when oil breaks down, it releases gases that go up through the soil and out into the atmosphere. And the state of California has said that, hey, wait a minute, if you live on top of that, and the DTSC can address this better than I do, for an extended period of time where you're breathing it 15, 18 hours a day for 20 or 30 years, it has an impact. When you are working in an office building, you're not there that long and that many years. And in a park, no one is there for that long. So it doesn't have the same impacts. And so it isn't necessary when you have commercial development, and it isn't necessary where you have open space and park, and it can just go.
Well, what it is, though, also is that what we're looking at is that when we're below the residential criteria in areas, we're still in landscaped areas going to have 5 feet. The buildings are still going to be on clean soil fill because they're going to be up above it. But for parks, for commercial buildings, vapor mitigation, this is what I talked about before, is subslab depressurization systems, different parking structures can be used. And what UPC agreed to in the JJ is said residential, it's not allowed. It either meets the vapor criteria or you move your residential building someplace else. Right. And so if it's commercial building, we can build in engineering design to take care of the vapors, but not for residential.
And in parks, it's unnecessary.
And in parks, it's just open air.
So to be clear, correct me if I'm wrong, so for residential, we're talking about a 1 in 1 million risk of cancer from exposure. That's the level of cleanup that must be done in the residential areas, and that's assuming people are eating dirt all the time for 30 years. That's my understanding. And then comparing that to Schlage, that's a 1 in 100,000
Correct.
level of cleanup, and that's why you can get
Which
away.
is the state standard.
Right. And that's why you can get away with having garages on the bottom floor.
Correct.
So, it's still 1 in a million. Okay.
For
So if we're
residential,
looking at
it's
commercial then, and we're looking at the parks, then in those areas, a 1 in 100,000 can make more sense because that level of remediation is okay because people are not in those places 24 hours a day or for very extended periods of time. They're visiting them and then they're leaving.
Correct.
Okay, so for just to break it down, the difference in remediation, it's 1 in a million for residential, and it's 1 in 100,000 for the commercial and the open space. Correct?
Although maybe Nicole can do it. DTSC is actually asked for 1 in a million as a starting point for commercial and residential. But maybe Nicole, you want to?
I'm not a toxicologist. Our toxicologist is currently on vacation, but we do have different screening levels when it comes to residential and when it comes to commercial industrial use. The commercial industrial use levels, the concentrations are higher because the assumptions are different. As Madison said, you are not living in your office for 30 years. You are not living in a park for 30 years. So the assumptions that are built in are very conservative. And they are on our website. I can send a link to anyone to our how our screening levels are derived. But I believe the commercial industrial screening levels are for 1 in a million cancer risk, but the concentrations are higher because the assumptions are different about your exposure.
Exactly.
I see.
Yes.
So what I wanted to do is go through, there were, as I said at the beginning of this, there were a number of questions that were sent to us prior to this. We've got them up on the board. I want to make sure that we're answering all of them as we go through. But for the remedial technologies that we're looking at for OU1 and OU2, as I've been if I summarize here, we're looking at capping, and contaminated soil would be either capped simply with soil or consolidate, move from an area and consolidate in an area and capped. And quite often that capping is done, there's a barrier layer, a geotextile, quite often they're orange these days, that's put down over the contaminated soil, and the clean soil is put above it. So it's sometime in the future when anybody digs, they dig down and they hit orange. So they go, oh, okay, it's now no longer clean soil. And that's done primarily for the construction folks because they have health and safety plans that say when you dig in the contaminated soil, you have certain protocol you have to, the way you handle soil, your health and safety programs, what you do with the soil once you dig it up. So again, that's the capping. There will be targeted excavation, on-site relocation, which basically goes under the capping. That'll be for moderately contaminated soil. And again, as we're saying, there's be a 5-foot minimum of soil in any landscaped or open space areas. Primarily looking at OU2, we're looking at targeted excavation with on-site treatment It could be for the chlorinated area or for bunker C. Some of the heavier concentration if it needs to be excavated for any kind of materials, and that you can either treat them on site. Typically, it's a heat treatment for the bunker C, aeration for the chlorinated, and then reused on site. Alternatively, for the heavily contaminated soil, sometimes it'll be just excavated and disposed off-site at a licensed facility. For the chlorinated area in OU2 and for the ongoing in OU1, as it has come in from Schlage, there's in situ bioremediation of the groundwater. And it's something that's normal, it's very effective, it's been very effective for Schlage, and it uses naturally occurring microorganisms to basically break down the chlorinateds. And then vapor mitigation is that in areas, what we just talked about, for example, commercial buildings that are in areas where the vapor concentrations are elevated above commercial levels, there will be vapor mitigation designed into those buildings. One thing to note that both DTSC and the Water Board have changed their requirements over the last years. So you can't just mitigate for vapors. Is that what happens is if you have concentrations that exceed typically 10 to the minus fourth at a minimum, sometimes even higher than that, you have to do remediation prior to the mitigation. So it's not just, okay, put a building over the top of it and put the mitigation in, which works very fine. The agencies are saying we want to try to get to a point where sometime in the future you don't need this mitigation anymore. So that's a new thing that just has really come about in the last 6 months. If I talk now, I start going east, sorry, to the landfill on the other side of the tracks. The lead agency, primary is the Water Board, and then San Mateo County is also involved primarily on the human health side, and between the Water Board and San Mateo County, they oversee the closure. The contaminants of concern there are landfill gas and the leachate. We're now just getting into the closure process for the landfill. We recently met with San Mateo County and the Water Board to talk about the requirements of a final closure plan and a post-closure maintenance plan. Those are being developed right now in coordination with them. They're quite helpful in letting us know what works, what doesn't work, what's required. The approval of the landfill closure and the post-closure maintenance plan will be by the Water Board, San Mateo County, which is an agent of Cal Recycle, and the City of Brisbane. So what will be required in the bigger picture is going to be continued monitoring of landfill settlement and groundwater, stormwater and leachate, operation and maintenance of the landfill gas extraction system, and then the final cover system, which is actually the primary piece of the whole closure plan, will have to cover the entire landfill. It has to meet the waste discharge requirements, Title 27 requirements. There'll be a post-closure maintenance plan, which includes a normal cover inspection, groundwater monitoring, leachate monitoring, gas monitoring, excuse me. And then at the end, land use controls, which really will limit site uses. And the requirements for post-closure land use, there are a number of the requirements that will be followed are in Title 27 itself. So basically, the message for the landfill is it's underway right now. Geosyntec is preparing a closure plan. We're meeting with the agencies to make sure it's going to cover what they need, and the cover will be, that was one of the questions, is what the cover will be. The cover is being designed now, and it'll have to be approved before any kind of installation. Question has come up a number of times about liquefaction. It came up even again tonight. What I'm showing you here is maps of the San Francisco Bay. The red is the higher risk liquefaction areas that USGS has done on their large-scale maps of the Bay Area. And what you'll notice is a large portion of San Francisco, you come down the coast, Brisbane, you come all the way to San Francisco Airport, everywhere else, is that the entire bay perimeter has liquefaction potential. And that's what the USGS tells everybody is if you build in this area, you have to design for it. So the way it's designed is that's what the geotechnical engineers in the Bay Area, that's one of their main things they do on every site, is they drill holes, they look at the potential for liquefaction. If that potential is there, they say, okay, what do you have to do on this site to be able to build safely? So that means buildings, do they have to go down on piles, or do you have to do any kind of site-specific work to be able to counter that? So it's something that is standard design protocol throughout the entire Bay Area, and it's not taken lightly. The building codes, the building departments, all work with this on a regular basis so that the liquefaction potential is not ignored. But just to, what this can show everybody is that it's common. There's many, many buildings around the bay that are built on potentially liquefiable soil.
I wanted to know if you were planning any residential use on the landfill? And have you mentioned maintenance of the gas collection system, but I understood that it really needed to be rebuilt rather than just maintained in the condition it's in. Are you going to rebuild it or not?
That will be part of the overall closure plan. It's currently being operated in coordination with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. And so, but as part of the closure plan, the whole question of landfill gas and how it's handled is part of the closure plan. So it will be dealt with, but it's currently operating under the oversight of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District.
It's very old, though, correct?
That's correct. But one of the things about it being old, the older it gets, the less gas that the landfill is creating, because what happens is peak gas generation is about 23 years. And so right now, we're on the downslope of gas generation from the landfill. So 23 years in 1967, is 2000. And so we're 20 years beyond the peak landfill gas generation time. So as the years go by, there's less and less gas being generated. But it has to be dealt with during the closure plan.
And is there any possibility you could use, if this goes beyond your requirements, I know, but I wondered if bioremediation could make any sense in order to speed compaction of that which could be bioremediated within the landfill in order to lessen future compaction of anything that you would place there?
Maybe I'll have Chris talk about it, but what it is the garbage settles slowly over the years as it biodegrades. And again, we're talking, this is 50-year-old stuff now, 50, 60-year-old stuff. And so what we're looking at is we have two kinds of settlement that's going on under the landfill. We have the waste that's settling, and it'll settle a little less again each year. And then the bay mud underneath that is also settling. And so Geosyntec has actually done a lot of analysis on the settlement rates, how quickly it's settling, and what they're predicting over time for that. And so that comes into the design of the entire system, building foundations, pavements, piping systems, and everything else. So it's not something that you can just kind of squirt something into the landfill to make it degrade. It's because...
Can we just do this? We don't know enough about the landfill right now, Clara, so that what I would suggest is maybe 6 months from now, we'll know a lot more about the landfill. Let's have another meeting that can be focused on the landfill, and then we can talk about all this. But right now, Tom is telling you generalities. We don't know specifically what we have here. And so let us just put a pin in that. Let's go do the same level of investigation that we've done on the west, and then once we know what we're doing and what is necessary for this particular landfill, then we can come back and have that meeting.
Will you consider things that are perhaps only recently developed, like you don't have a lining on this landfill? Is it possible that some other material has been developed for another person that you might be able to use to create a lining so that 50 years from now, after an 8.1 earthquake, you don't have a fissure that lets things out? And it's kind of, just think about it.
No,
I
no,
know
no.
you're
What
not
I'll tell you is,
required.
look, but I will tell you this. At the end of the day, we get to use all the technologies that are brand new because we're doing it now. So yes, we will look at all of that. And we will be guided by the state because they have very particular rules about what you're allowed to do. And so we met with the water board and with Cal Recycle. It's very prescriptive. And Greg, if you want to address, or Vic, they each have separate points of view that they have to take care of on the landfill to represent the public.
Okay, I'm gonna just move us along a little bit because I know that we're almost done. I think we're going to get through this slide and then we're going to get to the questions and answers. So if you would just hold that.
It's not a question. Do either of you, the two regulators, have anything to say? He just asked you if you had anything that you wanted to say.
Hold on.
Greg Shirley with San Mateo County and work for Cal Recycle essentially. Right now, it's true what they say. They are required to do certain requirements to close the landfill. It's all in Title 27. But it's hard to say what they're doing and what they're not doing because we don't have a plan in front of us. I can tell you some of the regulations that they're required for buildings, but at this point, they will have to comply with the regulations on how to close a site. Likewise, they'll have to comply with WDR and water board requirements. They're listed out in the regulations. It's this design team needs to come up with what they're talking about, how to achieve that.
Yes, hi. Vic Powell with the Water Board. I would say that for those that are not familiar with Title 27, it's the code that dictates how to close a landfill and how to manage a landfill. And we're in the process of slowly getting to the point where we can close this landfill. Typically, the code has a very prescriptive formula for how to close it. Usually it's 2 feet of clean clay-like material with another foot of vegetative layer above it. And in this particular site, in some areas, in a lot of areas, we've got 20 feet or 30 feet of soil, which we think is clean. A data gap analysis of the landfill should confirm that, and if not, it'll be managed accordingly. But right now, we've got enough material, we think, to close the landfill. It's just that we're in the process of potentially moving a lot of the soils to other areas of the site, such as OU2. And so it's that balance between how much do you take off the landfill and move to still meet that 2 foot and 1 foot standard. So that's kind of where we're at. We're expecting a closure plan that'll have details on how much they're going to cut and where it's going to go. And at that point, we can assess whether or not it complies with the code.
Just again, I think there's a commitment from UPC to have a community meeting when you get the closure plan, when you have more details, to share those with the community.
Yeah, and I just wanted to move to community outreach, which I think we really want to emphasize the importance of this, is that the draft RAPs for both OU1 and OU2, will be subject to a 30-day public comment period. There'll be a fact sheet, public notice, public meetings, and the agencies will they have to consider all the comments prior to making a decision to approve, to modify, or to deny approval of the RAPs. We encourage everyone to sign up for email updates. And the UPC team is available for meetings, for briefings, for presentations. If you want us to come to a meeting of yours and talk about any one specific thing, whether it's dust prevention, or whether it's a new landfill closure, or whether it's how vapors are dealt with, it's something that the UPC team is available to come and talk to you individually or you as a group about these issues. And if you see it in info@upcsf.com, you can get the information there on how to sign up for everything.
No, that's if you would like to have a meeting or.
I'm sorry.
If you have any questions or any comments, or you want to talk to us, or you have concern, if you just send it to info@upcsf.com, we will get it and we'll respond. Okay? So here are the questions that were sent to us in advance. And so I think it works as a good thing to review those because we went through a lot of information. So let's make sure that we've addressed these questions. So the first one is, how will you remediate the lead arsenate on OU-SF, OU-1, and OU-2? And so do people feel that we have covered that?
Can we get a show of hands? Yeah. No.
Okay. All right. All right. So that's that one. Can you outline the soil RAP that is currently under review by DTSC? And that we had a slide on that. Should we go back to that, or do people remember that?
You're okay? Okay, I'm going to do it the other way. If you feel like it wasn't answered,
You can address it again.
let us know. Okay, otherwise.
Okay.
Yes. No problem. That's why we're here.
I don't know if you discussed trees, like how are you going to deal with, you have this one area where you're going to just cover it with 5 feet, but then I have a house next to that area and I want to put in a fig tree or whatever that has a deep root system. How are you going to protect people and their trees and everything?
It's a great question. So we will not allow any food-bearing trees on the site, because we can't control that a root would get down and suck up water and then the fruit would be tainted. So trees, yes, absolutely, we will have trees. I know that there's been a lot of comment that we can't plant trees. We absolutely can plant trees, and we will plant trees. On the landfill side, it depends on how much dirt we have covering the landfill. Right now, we have some places we have 30 feet of dirt, so we can certainly plant trees. The minimum requirement, as Mr. Powell just went through, was 2-foot clay layer, which roots can't go through the clay layer, and then a 1-foot vegetative layer above. In that case, there aren't trees. And so we're looking at how we can keep a lot more of the dirt there so we can create that buffer zone so we can have trees. And so that's something that we're analyzing. On the western part of the site, we can have trees everywhere. We're just going to create clean fill areas where we put the trees in, and we'll manage what the root balls are, which is done all the time, so that they don't pull up sidewalks, et cetera. But there will be a restriction against growing food. And there's another restriction against drilling for water. Okay, because those are the things that we will restrict on the property. Okay, did that answer your question? Okay.
One more time on what you just said.
No, we were just talking about time, trying to keep on time. So go ahead with your question.
So no, I'm going on. Can we go on with the next?
Yeah,
with the next
please,
questions?
please,
Okay.
please.
All right. So.
Okay, good.
Data creation.
What was it?
What
We're
is
on
data
number 3,
creation?
right?
3.
What is the data creation of the 2 most recent environmental study characteristics on the contamination of the southern rail yard? And the data creation was spring of this year. It went on for about 2 months, and so it was spring of 2019. What are the data gaps that have been identified for the southern rail yard? Again, we went through that. And if people are not sure about that, we can go back or stay after and we can go over it again. But I think we've covered that, unless someone says otherwise. What is the data creation of the two most recent environmental studies with the contamination on Industrial Way? Again, spring 2019. What are the data gaps that have been identified for the Industrial Way sites? We consolidated that with OU2, and it was on that chart. During the past year, yeah, I'm sorry, where? Yeah.
So Stauffer Chemical is at 200 Industrial Way. Stauffer Chemical, first pesticide Monsanto ever, was a Superfund site. So one boring.
That's not true.
It was
No, no, no.
not a
It's
Superfund site.
Stauffer had many locations. This location was not the
Well,
Superfund site.
I'll send you the paperwork, but it was. Yeah.
No, wait. There was an application made that was denied, because I want to be clear about the facts. What are facts?
Yeah, and I'll
so
send
we've
you
researched this.
the paperwork. I
Okay.
got it from the CERCLA list, and it's Freedom of Information Act. It's available. But anyway, so you bore every 100 feet, which is longer than this building.
Correct.
So I want more information about the Stauffer site, because there's some documentation about that site being a serious hazard, and they didn't move forward because there was no target population. So I just want more information about that site.
Okay. We're happy to.
Noted. And I also just want to remind folks, there is going to be a draft RAP, so things like that, those comments too, can also be addressed by the regulatory agency. And yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and while we're on the same tack, a little deeper analysis about where the boneyard was and contaminants in that area. I think the areas where you have high contamination, it may warrant borings at maybe additional borings to make sure that you're really getting to the core of the matter. And then the other question I had earlier was about examination of radioactive material possibilities. And I know you discussed the soil that was imported from Hunter's Point, and that's been on everybody's mind, but what's been on my mind for a long time is initial contamination from the shipyards 80 years ago, because this was the dump. And they brought material from Hunter's Point here and dumped it. And in the landfill, I would like to be assured that there is not a radioactive material waiting there for us to unfortunately discover.
We agree. And so on the landfill, we are going to test for that. We are coming up with a methodology to do that now. What we had said is, from the period of time that the fill was put on the western rail yard side, it was pre-radioactivity.
The fill was, but have you tested for radioactive material in that area? Because Southern Pacific handled radioactive material as cargo.
We haven't, but we certainly can.
I would like that.
Okay.
I would feel reassured by that, and that was kind of brought
Okay.
up during the election.
Okay?
Okay, continue.
Okay. Vic Powell, who happens to be here gracing our presence tonight. During the last year, Vic Powell indicated that he believed there was a need for more studies on OU2. Have new environmental studies been ordered? So that was pre the data gap for OU2, and has the data gap sufficiently tested what you requested of us?
Yeah, it has. And we're in the process of, like you said, preparing that package to send to us in July, I guess.
Yeah. It's close. Okay. Will there be further effort to identify and locate with precision the sources of leachate in the lagoon and on its shore and in the interior ditch that crosses the landfill? The interior ditch, I assume it's
The Guadalupe Canal.
the Guadalupe Canal, right? Okay. I don't think we addressed that. So
No, actually, that is one, is that what's been done, the current system is an interim system. The shoreline was walked, looking for seeps over a period of time. The identified seeps have been intercepted. That material is pumped into the sewer system. The landfill closure plan will definitely address any leachate that could be seeping into Guadalupe Canal or into the lagoon. The whole control of leachate is part of the landfill closure plan. So under current time, we have an interim system in place. UPC has an interim system in place. But as for closure of the landfill, there will be a permanent leachate collection system as needed.
Okay. Have plans been made to rebuild the methane and other volatile gas collection systems? So that, Clara, that was the question you asked. Was the answer that we gave sufficient, or at least answered the question?
It answered the question because it's going to be, I think, reviewed by those
Right.
who regulate it. And so if they think it needs to be rebuilt,
That'll be part of the plan. Okay. Will the soil that has been surcharged on the landfill be removed and replaced with soil with correct pore size that has been tested and assured that it can be cleaned? Okay, I assume this is again referring to the landfill site, and we have to go through, and that's part of what we have to do during this coming up. We have to test it, we have to do a data gap, we have to see what the pore sizes are of what's there existing, and then we have to present a plan. So the answer is no, we haven't done that yet. Okay, but that will be done. All right, what progress has been made with regard to the nature of the cap that will be placed on top of the landfill? Similar issue is that once we determine the pore, and since it is a landfill, it is not consistent across the whole site. That's one of the things that's difficult about it, is the dirt came in at different times over different periods, and it's not consistent across. So that is a challenge for us. One of the things we're having to go back and look at is how do we do that? And so, we've launched Geosentech into that exercise now. They're looking at a way to approach it and how do you go back do it. And there are a bunch of different alternatives, and so they'll investigate that, and then we'll talk about that with the regulators, and then we'll have something to present. Okay? Let's see. Since this is an unlined landfill, have you investigated whether there's an environmentally safe product that could penetrate the waste, i.e. be pumped along the land perimeter of the waste and having the property of not adhered to objects like the photo flow solution, and keeps flowing until it is contained with something like bay mud on which hardens after a period of time? It sounds unlikely and very expensive if it exists. It may have been developed for some other purpose. It seems worth a try in light of the potential of the waste that might find its path outside, if an earthquake or some other fissure. Again, it was the question you asked. We don't have an answer for you today, and that's why what I proposed is for everything on the landfill, I would say 6 months, Chris, 4 months? Okay, how about this? Wait a minute, let me say it again. Chris, 3 months? Okay, all right. So listen, sometime towards the end of the fall, we will come back and we'll have much more information. But I don't want to give anybody false information of facts we don't have. Okay, so what we're trying to do is just deal with the facts we do know and tell you what we do know and what we don't know. And so with that, I think we've addressed the questions we can today.
Well, and I think we wanted, I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to say, could we have the PowerPoint presentation available?
Yeah.
Yep, we'll send it to you in a PDF.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And anybody who would like it, just send it to info, and we'll send you a copy, or the city has a copy and they can send it to you.
Okay, so I think we're going to do a public comment period. I checked in with the BBCAG because I didn't want to step on anybody's toes, and I thought we could just number folks, and if you remember your numbers, then we can go from there. And I will just, can I get this gentleman? He has had a question since the very beginning and has been very polite. So you've got to remember your numbers. I can't. So who else has comments? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm up to 5, so I'm going to call the number 1. Please go ahead. Oh, you need a microphone. Okay, no. I was liking having it.
Okay, thanks. So my comment is about the off-site cleanup that might be possible on your site. And off-site?
Off-site meaning?
Off-site hauled off to a landfill?
So cleanup
for
that
the
would be
hazardous?
excavated and taken away?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I would like to see a conveyor constructed to bring the clean dirt that's going to be coming over, and any hazardous materials that are found could be conveyed over to the landfill site. I know it's not licensed, but I'm sure the regulators would agree that we reduce the threats to all the communities that hazardous cleanup has to be transported through, as well as all the truck trips for all the dirt that has to come through all the neighborhoods to get to the other side. I think a conveyor would definitely keep your industrial containment and have some control. But my concern is the liability that those truck trips for off-site impose on this community and not the developer. Because it's my understanding, cradle to grave, we're going to be responsible for that wherever it goes. And if something happens in this transport, this community would be responsible. Thank you.
Greg, do you want to address that?
Well, hang on a second. I want to just make sure I understand the question, that the community would be responsible?
No.
I think the question was that and I think you might be mistaken on that. And what you're saying is if the soil is taken off-site and something happens, the community is the responsible party because there's a liability law that talks about cradle to grave. And do you want to address that? Because I don't think that. I don't think that's the law. Yeah. Turn on your mic. Yeah.
Thank you. The reason why I made this comment is because Al Zola, which was City of Brisbane's consultant, is the one that made that statement and reassured us that we would be responsible for that transport of that hazardous material. So I just wanted to put it out there that. Thank you.
Well, then I think that UPC wants to address this question quickly.
Hi, my name is Nicholas Targ. I'm environmental attorney with Holland and Knight for UPC. I'd be interested in understanding better what the consultant said, as it's a I'm not familiar, I've never heard of that kind of liability coming to the community. That would be a responsibility of the trucker, that'd be the responsibility of an operator, could be a responsibility of a consultant, could be the responsibility of the property owner, but not of the community.
All right, number 2.
I do want to address one other thing. Is this on now? I can't tell which way to go. Is that we are looking at a conveyor because the truck trips to move 1 million or 2 million yards or 3 million yards of dirt are too many to even think about. So we are looking at that of saying if we are going to move dirt across, we've talked about it with Caltrain, we'd have to create something that is safe because the trains are going up and down, and so it's technically possible, and we will look into it. The other thing is there is a truck route that we're looking at establishing so it never leaves the property as a second way of doing it. The last thing we want to do is start putting it out on the city streets. One of the questions was asked to us is, why don't we just go haul all the dirty dirt somewhere else? Well, really, that's just kicking the can down the road and making it someone else's problem. So we're committed to solving the problem in an environmentally responsible way and solving it here where the problem now exists, rather than just saying, well, we'll kick it down to somebody else's landfill and somebody else's community, and then when they close that landfill, they'll kick it to somebody else's community. It just moves around. We have dirty dirt. We know how to deal with dirty dirt, and we are going to deal with it appropriately. And moving the dirt from the east to the west is something we don't have an answer for yet, but it's thousands and thousands of truck trips that we don't want to put out on the road. So we're trying to find a way to do it without that.
Number 2.
Yes, I think this question is for Mr. Powell.
He's right there.
I was wondering if there's been any tests done on the water, on the leachate that's coming off the old site, the old dump site, and if that data is available.
Yes, my understanding is the leachate that exists at the landfill, we're seeing it come out in a couple spots where we're finding seeps. And many years ago, we looked at the quality of that leachate that was coming out. And the only thing that we saw from that liquid was what we call unionized ammonia. And that was the only thing that was, I guess you could say, of a concern to us. And so the way we've managed it is we've got this interim approach, collecting the seeps, the liquid from the seeps, and conveying that to a pump station. So as far as managing it long-term, that'll be part of their closure plan.
Number 3. Interesting, because my question is about the leachate also. In the October meeting that we had last October, you discussed about the deep dynamic compaction of the landfill from the building construction, and the water contacting the waste, creates the leachate, and that could increase the amount of leachate than what there has been now, which is pretty benign according to what you say, except it can't be that benign if you're actually siphoning off and disposing of it elsewhere. But it is a great concern because whatever leachate comes out goes into the bay or the lagoon, and I think that there needs to be more investigation of any additional seeps that have happened, especially with the heavy rainfall, and that we need to make a long-term plan, a 50-year plan, about how to deal with the leachate that will continue and maybe even increase with the compaction from buildings and sea level rise as well. So I'd love to see that addressed in your long-term plans and in the short-term plans. Okay. Number 4, I believe that's you.
I have one. Earlier it was mentioned that you had a consultant from the city involved, and I'm assuming that it was G. Fred Lee, and if it was, how much of this has he been part of?
Well, actually, I think the city has 2 consultants. So do you want to take that, or Clay, somebody for the city? I don't want to speak for the city.
Yeah, the city does have 2 consultants. EKI is one of it's an engineering firm, and Dr. Lee is the other consultant we have. Dr. Lee will be involved post-RAP, or once the RAP is issued, reviewing that, working with the city in terms of the long-term issues. EKI participated in review of the data gap, and I know we have met with DTSC. I don't believe we've met with regional board yet, but we did provide a significant amount of comments to DTSC in that process.
Okay, I still have more questions. In your discussion of remediation methods, it doesn't look like there's any intention to do any natural attenuation. And I was just wondering, the area that is north of Kinder Morgan is defined as a wetland for natural attenuation, and I'm just wondering if that's even on your scope, because you didn't mention that there will be any natural remediation.
I'm not sure I understand the question. So.
Okay. There are some wetlands out on the baylands.
Totally, we understand the wetlands.
That have been by, I guess it was Water Board because it was Kinder Morgan. has determined that those wetlands are a natural remediation or natural attenuation for gas that's been leaked and underground around Kinder Morgan. And so the question is, when you gave the lists of remediation methods, you didn't say any natural attenuation. What intentions do you have for wetlands as a remediation technique?
Okay, thank you. Chris, you want to address that?
Wait for the mic.
Actually, I don't have too much to say on this subject. We have not, as a company, myself personally, didn't look into the wetlands. So you have a wetland consultant. Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out.
Your mic is off.
An environmental question.
Yeah.
That's part of the wetlands question. So the wetlands we have biohabitat who is in charge of the wetlands, but this is if I understand, Dana, this is a different question. This is, because we're looking at scalping plants and other things, which would be, on-site attenuation of the water and how you treat it, but that isn't your question. I think your question is that there's some gas that's coming off Kinder Morgan, and how are we going to address it? That's where I'm.
Well, it's liquid petroleum. It does occasionally, there is off-gassing from it. And actually, when water settles in that area, you see it bubbling up out.
Okay.
And it smells sulfurous, so it's probably hydrogen sulfide. But
We'll go look at it. I don't. Do we have an answer for this?
No, because
No.
it's,
Okay.
if it's part of Kinder Morgan, what we'll have to do,
no,
When-
it's part of the Baylands.
Thank you for addressing that, because I have been wondering, I've been driving along tunnel and periodically I smell that smell, and I have been wondering for a very long time what that was. We finally
Okay.
figured
So
it
I
out.
think from our standpoint,
okay.
what we'll do is go back and get back. We know how to get a hold of you,
Okay,
obviously.
thank you.
And make sure that we follow up.
correct.
Well,
Have-
I understand, but let's just be clear about this. If it is on our property, we'll figure out what it is. If Kinder Morgan is the source of it, we will go after Kinder Morgan to clean it up.
Okay.
Okay?
Have there been any studies of toxins east of 101? Okay, so.
I don't think so.
Right. So at this point in time, you believe that 101 stops everything and that it's not been studied and therefore it won't be studied? Is there?
I don't know.
It's a data gap, and just curious if that's part of.
I think a long, long time ago
Yeah,
there
we don't-
was something, but it wasn't extensive. I think there were studies a very long time ago that showed up, I don't know how many borings, I don't know how many samples. It wasn't extensive, and it was years and years ago, but it should be in the history somewhere. I'm not saying that it solves the issue. I'm just saying that I think there was some kind of a study that extended, because you couldn't find anything at the borings that you did, even though there weren't many of them.
All right, let us take that under
Okay.
under
Thank
consideration.
you. And this gentleman had mentioned that he had done archaeological studies as well, as part of Data Gap. I heard you mention archaeological studies at one point. Did you do it for these sites?
Yes, we did a preliminary screening. We had Paleo West. They did a joint study they studied the same cores that Geosyntec took their samples from.
At what period? Because I'm mostly
During the same period.
concerned along Industrial Way. That would have been the area that probably would have had more human habitation.
Spring of 19, the cores were taken, and that was analyzed by both Geosyntec, and the same cores were analyzed for the archaeologists.
Okay. Let me see. Any findings on archaeological?
Let's not guess. If we have them, we can make that available. Yeah, we'll share that with you. You guys
So we
can
have
read it.
Bruel's over here taking
know.
notes. I know this is taped, so we'll get back to you on that.
And so back to natural attenuation, one of the techniques that has been recommended by members of the BBCAG for dealing with the volatile,
VOCs?
I'm trying to be a little more specific, but would be, and the gasolines, would be mycoremediation.
Right, where we're injecting microbes?
No. It's basically fungus.
Okay.
Mycoremediation. Yeah.
Okay, so a technique
So-
that we could possibly
Well,
consider?
and could have done it 30 years ago, and it would probably be resolved by today. So we're kind of curious why it just continues to be not remediated over this time.
What we have in OU1, the only thing that would be remediated using a biological technique is being done currently, this enhanced reductive dechlorination using bacteria, enhanced bacteria. It's eating up the chlorinated. So if we move to OU2, we have an area that will be done very much the same. There'll be some excavation and there'll be some ERD injections to be able to take care of the chlorinated there, the volatiles. The only other real groundwater problem or soil problem we have is the bunker C. And the bunker C is so thick that the biological degradation of that is very, very long-term. And it's hard to be effective because it's such a thick. If you had a diesel reacts really well to bacterial or fungal degradation. The bunker C is such a heavy, long-chain petroleum that it doesn't react as anywhere as quickly. So it's something that with the volume that we have, trying that kind of a technique doesn't really make any sense.
Okay. Can we go on to number 5? I want to be respectful of people's time, so it's 9 o'clock, but I also want you folks to answer your questions. So can we go to 5? We'll do one more round of questions. We'll stay after as long as you like. Again, you can get information, set up your own meetings, or email us questions. So number 5?
Sure. I had a question why OU1 was renamed to OU-SF. I would appreciate it if you'd actually add the keys back into those maps. They were absent from a lot of those maps. And also be very specific about what substances were tested for. If you want to put them all on one map, fine, but I think we as interested citizens would like to know the specifics. I was really interested in the dust monitors. How will they be collected? How often will they be taken to the lab? What is the security? Because we have recently seen problems with people swapping out samples. So I did want, and we don't have to answer that tonight, but I want to know in great detail what that's going to look like and what the oversight and the transparency is going to be about how that's collected and who's going to be collecting it and how do we know it's not being, not that I'm accusing any of you personally, but sometimes people take it upon themselves. And then I've been for years trying to get a real clear answer on what happens to the leachate after the pumps. Thank you.
Okay, you got all that? Go ahead.
Make sure you introduce yourself too so people know.
I'm Nicole Ewan, the project manager from DTSC. The naming convention has been a sore issue for years. In 2008, at the last CAG meeting, I did discuss this, I believe. In 2008, DTSC issued, I believe it was a consent order that redefined Schlage and formerly known as OU1 into two different sites. So there was the Schlage site, which comprised mainly the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, and then There was the SP Brisbane site, also known as OU1, which was renamed to UPC OU-SM. OU means operable unit. We tend to use operable units just to split up a site into smaller areas that are more easily tackled. So we usually do them based on geography or contaminants of concern. So that's not really UPC's fault for the naming issue. That was DTSC 2008. I was not present at the department, so I cannot take any responsibility for that name change. Everyone who was involved with that has retired many years ago. So I do understand the frustration, and we have been working with UPC to have a standardized figures, and we regret the oversight for having that confusion. I totally understand. When I first picked up the site, it was, why are we using all these different names? But UPC OU-SM is OU1. That UPC is trying to be internally consistent with how DTSC defined the site.
SM referring to San Mateo?
San Mateo County. And there's also UPC OU-SF, which is San Francisco.
Could you say one more thing about the source of the contamination's influence on the naming, and that Schlage actually is the source, so Schlage, it has to be considered when you're talking about OU1?
So Clara's asking me to define the source of the chlorinated compounds. As we defined it in 2008 order, all the chlorinated compounds are considered to be part of the Schlage site as they originated from the Schlage site. Southern Pacific never used chlorinated compounds in their operations. All those chlorinated compounds migrated south from the Schlage site. So all the VOCs at UPC OU-SM are considered technically part of the Schlage site, even though they are physically in Brisbane.
Thank you.
And then the other question was about leachate. Where does the leachate go? That's Howard? Okay.
The leachate collection system is pumped into a manhole that enters the Bayshore Sanitary District and then goes on to the San Francisco, the Southeast treatment plant.
So it goes to a treatment plant? Okay, and it's treated. Okay. So it's 9 o'clock, and I want to defer to you folks. Do you...
It's fine with me if there are more questions, if it's fine with the BBCAG.
Do you want to do one more round of questions, folks? Okay, it looks like yes, and then we'll be here afterwards, and I'm just going to do this one round, and then we'll stay after.
Can
So-
we get a show of hands just
Sure.
so we have a sense like how many additional questions there are out there?
We have 4. One. Oh, excuse me. So let me just do this. One more. High hands up high. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So 6 questions.
And then additional questions, I think because of the hour, additional questions beyond that I think should be either done on a
Email.
one-on-one or through the email.
Exactly. Okay. So I started over here, right? I don't even know where I...
Oh, hi, yeah, I was curious.
Hold on. Be curious. And
The collection system that dumps into the sewage system, about how much is that per hour per day?
Let's see. I know that I had those numbers available at the sanitary district. I couldn't tell you.
Just about.
Yeah, it varies, but
It varies,
generally
yeah.
speaking, it's about 10 gallons per minute.
Number 2?
More than I thought.
What kind of remediation does the 100 acres of HS rail maintenance yard require? 100 acres of the HS rail yards require remediation.
HS rail yard, I'm not.
High-speed rail?
The maintenance yard, 100 acres.
Make sure I understand the question. There is a proposal by High Speed Rail to take a portion of the site,
100
roughly
acres,
100
yes.
acres, as a maintenance yard.
Right.
Um,
What will
I don't-
be
That would be their
required?
responsibility.
I don't know. I don't know.
We
That
don't, we
will
just
be
don't know
studied.
yet? Is that
I
it?
have no idea. They will be studied in their EIR.
Because the remediation depends on the final use, right? So we're studying remediation right now for commercial use, for open space and recreational use, for housing. We're not really studying remediation for an industrial site like that. So if high-speed rail came in, and anyone correct me if I'm wrong, if high-speed rail comes in and takes 100 acres, that's their responsibility, and it would be based on the work that the use. So it's really hard to know now because that's not incumbent on UPC to figure out. That's really high-speed rail's responsibility to understand that. And so we won't know really unless that actually is going to happen, which we may not find that out for quite a while.
Okay. This is a subject that I think is in some ways related to what we're talking about tonight, and it's something that nobody really wants to think about, but because of the shenanigans we've been seeing recently from PG&E, I think we have to talk about it, and that's bankruptcy. If, for instance, and in the case of PG&E, the Camp Fire and all these other fires occurred because of their equipment, and they failed to maintain their equipment, and then they declared bankruptcy. And now all of the costs for the liability shifts to PG&E's customers with raised rates and power outages and all the rest of it. So, for instance, if there were some type of large earthquake and there were a breach in the building area of OU1 or OU2, and it was such a large breach that the cost of correcting it would be in the, millions of dollars. And Universal Paragon Corporation then shifted funds to a shell corporation and declared bankruptcy. Would the liability then shift to the citizens of the city of Brisbane?
I think that's a legal question.
At one point, the city did discuss requiring a bond, and I don't know where we are in that process, but that was discussed at a number of the public hearings when we were looking at, okay, well, I'm just saying, we did discuss that possibility where in the event of something like that occurring, taking those steps to require some type of bond or some type of insurance plan, right, that would cover those residents. Now, of course, mass devastation, right, you don't exactly know what sort of level of devastation you're planning for, but at least on our end, I don't know how you want to answer that from your end, but that was something that was discussed at many of the public hearings amongst the council, was what to do in that case, and that was something that we talked about. So, we don't know yet. We have to see, I think, what the development looks like, how many units are out there. Is that possible to secure that type of insurance or bond to cover these homes? But it's definitely something that I'm going to make sure we have an answer to, because that's incredibly important. So from a city council perspective, that's something we're worried about, and that's something we're going to look into and are committed to. And, what UPC will do in that event, whether they'll shift money around, I don't know that they would say that now, but.
So is the question that it would be, there was an earthquake and people's houses were damaged in an earthquake, and we would be responsible for that if they chose not to keep earthquake insurance?
I'm wondering if it's like for a cap,
I'm
if the
trying
cap.
I'm trying to understand the issue.
Environmental damage.
Okay.
For exposure, maybe a cap failed, maybe there was something in some case of.
Yeah, so there are a couple of pieces here. It's possible to come up with a scenario that is a mass devastation beyond any expectation that anyone might reasonably have. And in that situation, there would be, one could have a conversation about an issue. In the ordinary course of events, DTSC and the Water Board, Cal Recycle, actually in this case, will require financial assurance that will need to be posted by the entity that's conducting the remediation. And that will be posted, that will be held or available to DTSC to utilize in the event that there's a failure to remedy a condition or to make sure that there's proper operation and maintenance of the site. I don't know if that addresses the question.
And then number 4? Yes, of course.
Again, Vic Powell with the Water Board. There is financial assurance that's required for the landfill. So the landfill will need to have financial assurance for 30 years based on reasonably foreseeable releases and for ongoing monitoring. So we have financial assurance instruments to cover those two scenarios on the landfill. In the event of mass catastrophe, maybe there could be something set up to deal with that situation, but the state does not require coverage in that scenario.
Does the 30-year time start at the end of the project build out? So because, the project could take a while to build out. If it starts at the beginning and buildings are completed over 20 years, then those final buildings are only left with that 10-year coverage.
Yeah. So just to be clear, this financial assurance is only required on the landfill side of the property. So
Right.
the landfill, the 30-year kicks off when the landfill has been formally closed. So that means it's been capped, and once it's capped, that's when the 30 years starts.
I think you wanted to say one more thing? Okay.
DTSC requires a similar 30-year financial assurance. Moreover, it's an evergreen financial assurance. So it's 30 years and then an additional 30 years and so on until the site is clean or DTSC determines that it's no longer necessary. That amount is ultimately calculated by DTSC. It's based upon the operation and maintenance and the replacement, for example, of hardscape on a ongoing basis.
I would personally like to see a breakdown of all of these liability issues and all of the time spans that are related to them, whether 30 years or what have you, so that everybody can see specifically what is going to happen to the city of Brisbane if something occurs on the land on which you build and a catastrophic event happens, who is going to end up paying for it? Because if it's going to be for the residents of the city of Brisbane, we need to know that.
Okay. All right. I think we have one fellow over here, and we have one more person after that, and here you go.
Thank you. As I recall, the dense non-aqueous phase TCE under Schlage has not been removed. It's going to remain there. Is that true? No?
It's been, here, I'll just go back up. Here, let me just. The dense, what we call DNAFL, non-aqueous phase liquid, has been remediated. It's been injected. It's been taken care of underneath the Schlage property. There's been a number of injection events under that, and so that's where it's in a monitoring phase right now. Is they're watching the concentrations come down, and if they don't continue to come down, there may be some additional injections necessary. But that injection work has been done, and so to my knowledge, the DNAPL has been taken care of.
Do you have a plume map? Do you have a map of the hydrology and the gradient of the TCE and all the other VOC?
It's all in reports, and yes, we could.
Great.
We could go ahead and if you send an email in, if you the info, we can provide that for you. Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, who was the last person that had a comment over here? We have two more, so here, and that's going to be it. Here you go.
Regarding the utility corridors, the gas lines, the sewer lines, and with all the settling and the sinking, how do you keep those corridors secure from, maybe a gas line breaking because the land settles? Because this is in a zone like Tunnel Road is always sinking. Since I've lived here, it varies a whole lot. So how do you keep those secure? And also, the road, Tunnel Road, Brisbane is going to have to bear the cost as it, waves and we have to get it paved and flattened out again. Are the roads on UPC property going to be maintained by Brisbane or UPC as they sag and flow? And are the utility corridors going to be maintained by you guys? And is there a way to monitor them so if they do sag and get near breaking or something happening, is that monitored?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of your question, in the design, as construction goes, for example, in this case, Geosyntec has already done analyses and will do more analyses on the predicted amount of settlement, the total amount, and then there will be a differential within that settlement area. The civil engineers use that to design their water, gas, all the different systems. They use flexible pipes. They don't use, the hard steel pipe. And those are monitored over time. And if the settlements don't go as predicted, then portions of the line have to be replaced. So basically it's designed with a settlement that's been predicted, and if it doesn't meet that settlement, then the different portions of the line that don't meet that criteria have to be redone. So for example, sewer lines get, if they think it's going to settle, they get put on a different slope so that they'll settle appropriately. They don't have to be replaced. And again, gas lines, that's all very critical, obviously, for that, and those are monitored.
Okay. Our last question is over here.
Hi. A lot of what we've been talking about tonight with remediation is to keep the toxins from reaching the people who live and move about the top. And you talked about liquefaction, and you said designers know how to build for this. They build all over for this. So we're now entering a world it's a different world. We have these severe storms. We have these floods. And in these floods, like we've all seen the pictures of Houston, et cetera, and the water goes up over the top of the roof of the homes. And so in that case, there's a mixture of the chemicals in the ground and the water at the top. There's been found to be a lot of toxicity from those floods. So is there some plan, since this is happening more frequently, we're no longer a 100-year flood zone, it's a who knows what year flood zone. Is there a plan to keep the toxins away from?
I think it's a great question, and part of it is we're planning for, is it a 100-year sea level rise?
I don't know where it is right now, but the whole sea...
The design to?
Hold on.
But that's what happens. It all is the same thing. It's just, it's how it drains, where it goes, and the areas that are flooding, the Mississippi River flowed over, and that's where the flood happens. And it's not just from the water that just comes down from it. It goes to a river, it overruns its banks, and there it goes. So I think from what we're looking at here is the bay and the lagoon are those, in our case, the equivalent bodies of water we have to worry about. And so part of the design to standard is there is the Bay Area build to line of the anticipated 100-year storm on top of the, I think it's a 100-year sea level rise.
The sea level rise that we took into consideration was 55 inches. I don't remember the exact study who came up with 55 inches, but that was what the BCDC used at the time. And so when we do our new grading plan, we will reevaluate that to see if that's the latest standard that the BCDC would ask us to. And the rainfall runs off into the bay.
Right, but it may run off into the low area of Brisbane downtown as well. It goes to the low area.
Yeah, the part of where that happens is along Bayshore, which is where we take a lot of the water that comes on, if you look right below Main Street, I think that's the area you're talking about. Downtown, okay, so that. I don't think so, because it's not going to run from there down there. I think that our job is to make sure that it goes. We have to attenuate it on site, and then it goes into our storm drain and stormwater system. So it would be an event that was all flooded, and then where would it go? So that's your question.
Info.
Okay, and we can. So okay. No, we'll look at it, and we'll come back to you with what we know.
Okay.
Hey, Vic, did you want to address that?
Oh.
Wait for the mic, because people at home literally cannot hear if you don't speak into a mic.
I was just going to add, and maybe I'm overstepping my bounds here, but a project this size is likely going to have bioswales, so that will take on a lot of the water as well.
Correct, it will.
I think that's it. So just one more as a reminder, info@upcsf.com. We have a couple action items. And Clara, please take it over.
Did you say you had action items?
No, I said we have a couple action items to get back to people. We've been taking notes, so we'll get that information out.
The remainder of the agenda is directed at BBCAG members and relates to a field trip and future meetings. Our next meeting will be held on October 15th, and at that time, I'm not sure what we'll be discussing. We aren't going to force Vic Powell to come back and go over what we just gone over. So I believe what we'll be thinking about BCDC's rep possibly, or a toxicologist to discuss the questions that people have. Go ahead.
Can we continue to have the BBCAG meetings here where they're able to be recorded and broadcast to the public? This is very important.
I admit it's ideal, but I think that the owners of the building may have some other plans. I'm not certain. We'll ask and see what happens.
Okay. I think it's really important that this was a public meeting that went beyond the confines of the room.
It's clear that the public wants to come here more than they want to come to our humble abode at the community center. So we'll see whether it works for the city of Brisbane. BBCAG is certainly open to it. Thank you. Thanks very much. Are there any other questions? Thank you, everyone. I appreciate people staying to such a late hour. And I appreciate the presentations and all the support that has been given.